The gunshot that rang out across the moonlit barn startled the horse more than it did the woman crouched behind the hay bales, her hands trembling as they gripped a stolen saddlebag stuffed with dried meat and cornmeal. Arizona Zimmerman had learned long ago that survival meant being quick, silent, and willing to run at the first sign of trouble. But tonight her luck had finally run out in this dusty corner of New Mexico territory near Las Lunas, and the man standing in the doorway with his rifle pointed skyward was built like the very mountains that surrounded this valley. "I know you are in here," the man called out, his voice carrying the rough edge of someone who spent more time talking to cattle than people. "That shot was a warning. The next one will not be." Arizona pressed herself lower against the barn floor, her heart hammering against her ribs so hard she worried he might hear it. She was 20 years old and had been stealing to survive for the better part of 3 years now, ever since her father died of pneumonia and left her with nothing but debt and a name that meant less than dirt in these parts. The year was 1881, and the New Mexico territory was unforgiving to women alone, especially those without money or family to speak for them. "I am not the law," the man continued, taking a step into the barn. The moonlight caught his profile now, and Arizona could see he was younger than his commanding voice suggested, maybe 25 at most, with dark hair that fell past his collar and a jaw set with determination. "But I will fetch the sheriff if you make me. Come out now and we will talk." Arizona weighed her options quickly. She had a knife tucked into her boot, but she was not fool enough to think she could take on an armed man twice her size. She had seen what happened to women who fought back against men with power in this territory. The saddlebag held maybe 3 days' worth of food if she rationed carefully, and she had already been caught, which meant running would only make things worse. Slowly, she stood up from behind the hay bales, her hands raised to show they were empty. The stolen saddlebag lay at her feet. The man lowered his rifle slightly when he saw her, his dark eyes widening in what might have been surprise. "You are just a girl," he said, though his tone suggested he was reassessing the situation rather than dismissing her as harmless. "I am a woman," Arizona corrected sharply, her chin lifting despite the fear coursing through her veins. "And I am sorry about your food. I was hungry." The man studied her for a long moment, taking in her worn dress that had been mended so many times the original fabric was hard to distinguish, her too thin frame, and the desperate look in her green eyes that probably told him everything he needed to know about her circumstances. He lowered the rifle completely and leaned it against the barn wall. "When did you last eat?" he asked. The question caught her off guard. "Yesterday morning, some bread crusts behind the hotel." He made a sound that might have been disgust or sympathy, she could not tell which. "My name is Isaac Turner. This is my ranch, and that is my food you are stealing." "What is your name?" "Arizona Zimmerman," she said quietly, wondering if he would recognize it. Some people in Las Lunas still remembered her father, though rarely with kindness. "Robert Zimmerman's daughter," Isaac said, and there was recognition in his voice. "I heard he passed some time back. I am sorry for your loss." Arizona said nothing. Sympathy did not fill empty stomachs or pay off debts. "You have been stealing around town for a while now," Isaac continued, crossing his arms over his chest. "I have heard the talk. The mercantile, the bakery, old widow Henderson's chicken coop. People are getting angry, Arizona. They are talking about setting up a watch, catching whoever is doing this and making an example. Then I guess you should turn me in and collect whatever reward they are offering," Arizona said bitterly. "Get it over with. I did not say I was going to turn you in." Isaac walked closer, his boots crunching on the hay-strewn floor. Up close, She could see his face more clearly in the lamplight that spilled from the ranch house beyond. He had kind eyes, she realized, which was not something she had expected. "I said people are angry. There is a difference." "What do you want then?" Arizona asked suspiciously. In her experience, men who did not turn you in to the law usually wanted something worse. Isaac seemed to read her thoughts because his expression hardened slightly. "Not that. I am not that kind of man, and you can ask anyone in Las Lunas about my character if you doubt it." He paused, scratching his jaw thoughtfully. "You need food and I need help around the ranch. My last hired hand left 3 weeks ago to try his luck in the silver mines up north, and I have been struggling to keep up with everything alone. I am proposing a trade. You work for me, honest work, and I will provide food and a place to sleep. Barn has a spare room that is clean and private. You can lock it from inside." Arizona stared at him, certain she had misheard. "You want to give me work? After I tried to rob you, you are stealing food, not money or valuables. That tells me you are desperate, not criminal." Isaac gestured toward the saddlebag at her feet. "Besides, if I turn you in, you will sit in jail for a few weeks, maybe a month. Then you will be right back where you started. Nothing solved, and you will be marked as a thief for life. This way, you get a fresh start and I get help with the ranch. Seems fair to both of us." "What kind of work?" Arizona asked cautiously. "Feeding the animals, mucking stalls, mending fences, helping with the garden, cooking meals. Whatever needs doing around here. I run cattle mostly, about 200 head, and I have a dozen horses, some chickens, 2 pigs. It is a lot for one person to manage alone." Arizona tried to find the catch, the hidden trap in his offer, but his expression remained open and honest. She had been alone for so long, trusting no one, that the idea of someone offering genuine help seemed almost fantastical. "Why would you do this for a stranger who tried to steal from you?" Isaac was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting toward the open barn door and the star-filled sky beyond. 3 years ago, I was working on a ranch up in Colorado Territory. Owner caught me taking an extra portion of beans one night when I thought no one was looking. I had not eaten in 2 days and I was still a growing boy, always hungry. He could have fired me on the spot, left me with nothing in the middle of winter. Instead, he sat me down and asked why I had not just asked for more food. When I told him I was too proud to beg, he said something I never forgot. He said pride was fine for men with full bellies, but it was a luxury the hungry could not afford. He gave me extra rations that whole winter and taught me that sometimes people just need a hand up, not a hand out. Arizona felt something crack in her chest, some hard shell she had built around herself to survive. "He sounds like a good man." He was. He died the following spring when his horse threw him during a storm. I inherited a small sum from him because he had no family, and I used it to come down here and start this ranch 3 years ago. Been building it up slowly since then. Isaac met her eyes again. "So what do you say, Arizona Zimmerman? Will you accept my offer?" She looked down at the stolen saddlebag, then back up at this cowboy who had every right to see her punished but was instead offering her salvation. "Yes," she said quietly. "Yes, I will accept." Isaac nodded once, satisfied. "Good. First things first, you need food. Come up to the house, and I will make you something proper to eat. Then we will get you settled in the barn room and talk about your duties starting tomorrow." Arizona followed him across the dusty yard to the ranch house, a modest single-story structure built from adobe and wood, typical of New Mexico Territory construction. Inside, the main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a fireplace taking up most of one wall and a rough-hewn table with 4 chairs positioned near the center. The space was clean but sparse, the home of a man who spent more time working than decorating. Isaac pointed to one of the chairs. "Sit. This will not take long." She sat gingerly, watching as he moved about the kitchen with practiced efficiency. He built up the fire that had been banked for the night, set a pan on the stove, and began slicing salt pork. Within minutes, the smell of frying meat filled the air, and Arizona's stomach growled loudly enough that Isaac glanced over with a slight smile. "When is the last time you had hot food?" he asked, cracking eggs into the pan beside the pork. "Not since before my father died," Arizona admitted. "I used to cook for him every day. We did not have much, but we always had something hot." "What happened after he died? Did he not leave you the house?" Arizona's expression darkened. "He left me the house and all his debts. Turned out he owed money all over town, more than the house was worth. The bank took it to settle what he owed them, and the other creditors split what little was left. I had nothing." Isaac slid the food onto a plate and set it in front of her along with a fork. "Why did you not ask for help? The church, maybe, or the Women's Aid Society? I did ask." Arizona picked up the fork, forcing herself not to shovel the food into her mouth like an animal despite her hunger. "The church said they could not help unmarried women without family sponsorship. Said it would not be proper. The Women's Aid Society offered to help me find a husband, someone who would take me on despite having no dowry. They had a widower picked out, a man named Chester Perkins. He was 53 years old with 6 children and a mean reputation. When I said no, they told me I was being foolish and proud. Maybe I was, but I could not do it. I could not marry a man I did not know just to survive." "That was brave," Isaac said, sitting down across from her with his own plate of food. "It was stupid," Arizona corrected, but she said it without heat. "Brave does not keep you warm at night or fill your stomach." They ate in silence for a few minutes, and Arizona had to concentrate on eating slowly, even though everything in her wanted to gulp it all down at once. The food was simple but good, and it was the best thing she had tasted in months. When her plate was clean, Isaac stood and refilled it without asking, adding more eggs and some beans he heated in a pot. "Thank you," she said quietly when he set the second helping in front of her. "You are welcome." Isaac leaned back in his chair, watching her eat with an expression she could not quite decipher. "I meant what I said about honest work. I will not tolerate stealing, lying, or shirking duties. But if you work hard and keep your word, you will always have food and a place to stay here. Understood?" "Understood." Arizona set down her fork, her stomach finally beginning to feel full for the first time in recent memory. "How much will you pay me? For the work, I mean." "Standard ranch hand wage is $25 a month plus room and board." "I will start you at 15 since you are learning and adjust upward as you prove yourself." "Fair." It was more than fair, and they both knew it. Arizona nodded, feeling tears prick at her eyes though she fought them back. She would not cry in front of this man who had already seen too much of her weakness. "Fair. All right then." Isaac stood and collected their plates, setting them in a wash basin by the stove. "Let me show you where you will be staying." He led her back outside and across to the barn, lighting a lantern as they entered. At the far end, past the horse stalls and tack room, was a small door Arizona had not noticed before. Isaac opened it to reveal a compact but clean room with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and a small window that looked out toward the mountains. A thick wool blanket lay folded at the foot of the bed, and there was even a rag rug on the floor to keep the chill away. "Previous hand lived here," Isaac explained, setting the lantern on the chest of drawers. "I cleaned it out after he left. Bedding is fresh, and that lock works properly." He demonstrated, showing her how to slide the bolt from the inside. "No one will bother you here. You have my word on that." Arizona stepped into the room, running her hand over the blanket, touching the wash basin as if to confirm it was real. "This is more than I expected." "It is what you deserve. Everyone deserves a safe place to sleep." Isaac moved back toward the door. "I will let you get settled. There is water in the pitcher and some soap in the dish. Tomorrow we will start early, around dawn. I will show you the morning routine and we will go from there." "Sleep well, Arizona." "Isaac," she called as he started to leave. He paused, turning back. "Why are you really doing this? Please tell me the truth." He was quiet for a long moment, his face half shadowed in the lamplight. "Because I look at you and I see myself 3 years ago. Desperate, alone, too proud to ask for help even when I needed it most. That ranch owner in Colorado saved my life, and I guess I am trying to pass that forward. Is that truth enough for you?" "Yes," Arizona whispered. "Yes, it is." After he left, she closed the door and slid the bolt home, testing it twice to make sure it held. Then she sat on the edge of the bed, her hands shaking as the reality of what had just happened washed over her. She had been caught stealing, had expected jail or worse, and instead had found food, shelter, work, and something she had not felt in 3 long years. Hope. Dawn came too quickly, announced by a rooster's crow that startled Arizona awake from the deepest sleep she had experienced in months. For a confused moment, she did not remember where she was. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back, and she sat up quickly, her heart racing. Pale sunlight filtered through the small window, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. She washed her face in the basin, braided her dark hair as neatly as she could manage without a mirror, and smoothed down her worn dress. When she opened the door, she found Isaac was already moving about the barn, mucking out the first stall with practiced efficiency. "Morning," he said without stopping his work. "There is another pitchfork in the tack room. You can start on the stall next to this one." Arizona found the tool where he indicated and set to work, trying to match his rhythm even though her arms protested the unfamiliar labor within minutes. She had done hard work before, cooking and cleaning and taking care of her father, but ranch work was different. It required a kind of sustained physical effort she was not accustomed to, and her muscles burned as she pitched soiled hay into a wheelbarrow. Isaac did not comment on her obvious struggle, but after she had finished the second stall, he called a break. "Come on, time to feed the chickens and collect eggs." The chicken coop was behind the house, a sturdy structure that protected the birds from predators at night. Isaac showed her how to scatter the feed, how to check the nesting boxes for eggs without disturbing the hens too much, and how to spot signs of illness or injury in the flock. "Chickens are easy enough once you know their temperament," he explained, gently moving a plump red hen aside to collect the eggs beneath her. "They need fresh water daily, food twice a day, and their coop cleaned once a week. Can you handle that?" "Yes," Arizona said, carefully gathering eggs into the basket he provided. "I have dealt with chickens before. My father and I used to keep 3 of them before he got sick and we had to sell them for medicine money. Did the medicine help? No. He died anyway, and we were just poorer for trying to save him." Isaac said nothing to that, but his expression softened with understanding. They worked in companionable silence for a while longer, collecting a dozen eggs total, then returned to the house where Isaac taught her how he preferred his breakfast prepared. "I am not particular," he said as she sliced bread and set coffee to boil. "But I work hard and I eat accordingly. 3 eggs, plenty of bacon or salt pork, bread, sometimes beans or potatoes if I have them. You should eat the same. You will need the strength for ranch work." They ate together at the kitchen table, and Arizona found herself sneaking glances at him when she thought he was not looking. In the morning light streaming through the windows, Isaac Turner was undeniably handsome in a rugged, practical way. He had strong features that spoke of his work ethic, dark eyes that missed nothing, and hands scarred from years of labor. But it was his quiet kindness that struck her most deeply. The way he explained things patiently without condescension, and never made her feel foolish for not knowing something. After breakfast, he took her on a tour of the full ranch, showing her the extent of his property and explaining his operation. The cattle were grazing in a large pasture to the east, red and brown bodies spread across the scrubland like stones. The horses occupied a separate corral closer to the barn, and Isaac introduced her to each one by name, explaining their personalities and quirks. "This is Copper," he said, running his hand along the neck of a chestnut gelding with a white blaze. "He is my main riding horse, steady and smart. That black mare there is Storm. She is temperamental but fast. The bay is Dusty, good for pulling a wagon. I have some younger horses I am training to sell, and a few that belong to neighbors who pay me to board them." "You train horses too?" Arizona asked, impressed despite herself. "Someone has to, and I am decent at it. Learned from an old vaquero who worked on that Colorado ranch. He taught me that patience and consistency matter more than force when it comes to horses." Isaac moved to the next stall where a young sorrel colt poked his head over the door. "This one is Sunrise, born here 4 months ago. His mother was Storm and his father was a Mustang that jumped the fence one night. He has wild blood, but I think he will be something special once he is trained properly." Arizona reached out tentatively to touch the colt's soft nose, and Sunrise snuffed at her hand curiously. "He is beautiful. He is trouble," Isaac corrected with a slight smile. "But yes, beautiful too." They spent the rest of the morning working together, with Isaac teaching Arizona the routine he followed daily. Check the water troughs, inspect the fences for damage, ensure the cattle had not wandered too far or gotten stuck in arroyos. Feed the pigs, slop out their pen, gather more eggs from any hens that had laid since morning. Weed the garden, water the vegetables, harvest anything ripe enough to pick. By noon, Arizona was exhausted in a way that went bone deep. Her hands had developed blisters from the pitchfork and hoe, her back ached, and her dress was streaked with dirt and sweat. But when Isaac called a break for lunch and she looked back at all they had accomplished, she felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest. Pride. Real pride, not the defensive kind that had kept her from begging, but the earned kind that came from honest work. "You did good this morning," Isaac said as they ate cold meat and cheese with fresh bread in the shade of the house. "Better than I expected for your first day." "I am slower than you need," Arizona said, examining her blistered palms ruefully. "Speed comes with practice. What matters is that you are trying." He pulled a small tin from his pocket and handed it to her. "Salve, for the blisters. It will help them heal faster and prevent infection. Put it on every night before bed." Arizona accepted the tin gratefully, touched by his thoughtfulness. "Thank you. Cannot have my only ranch hand unable to work because of torn-up hands," Isaac said pragmatically, but there was warmth in his voice that suggested he cared beyond the practical concerns. That afternoon, Isaac took her into town to purchase supplies and introduce her to people as his new hired hand. Las Lunas was a small town even by New Mexico Territory standards, just a handful of buildings clustered along a dusty main road. There was a mercantile, a saloon, a church, a hotel with a restaurant attached, the sheriff's office, and a few other businesses that served the ranchers and travelers passing through. People stared as Arizona walked beside Isaac toward the mercantile, and she could hear the whispers starting up behind them. Everyone in Las Lunas knew who she was, knew she had been stealing to survive, and their expressions ranged from suspicious to outright hostile. "Isaac Turner," a woman's voice called out sharply. They turned to see Margaret Henderson, the elderly widow whose chicken coop Arizona had raided twice, marching toward them with fire in her eyes. "Tell me you have not hired that little thief." "Arizona works for me now," Isaac said calmly but firmly. "She is my ranch hand, and I will thank you to treat her with respect." "Respect," Margaret sputtered. "She stole from me, from half the town, and you are rewarding her with employment." "She was hungry and desperate, and now she has honest work," Isaac replied. "What would you have her do, Margaret? Starve? Turn to worse ways of surviving? I am giving her a chance to make things right." "She should be in jail," Margaret insisted. "And what would that accomplish?" "She would sit in a cell for a few weeks, emerge with even fewer prospects than before, and you still would not have your stolen eggs back. This way, she can work and save money and eventually make restitution to those she took from. Seems more practical to me." Arizona felt her face burn with shame as people gathered to listen to the confrontation, but Isaac stood his ground, his expression brooking no argument. Finally, Margaret threw up her hands in disgust. "Fine. But if anything else goes missing, everyone will know who to blame." She shot Arizona a withering look. "You had better walk a straight line, girl." "I will," Arizona said quietly. "I am sorry for stealing from you, Mrs. Henderson. When I have money saved, I will pay you back for what I took." Margaret seemed taken aback by the direct apology, and some of the anger drained from her expression. "See that you do," she said gruffly, then turned and walked away. Isaac placed a hand briefly on Arizona's shoulder, a gesture of support that was gone almost before she registered it. "Come on. Let us get what we need and head back." Inside the mercantile, the owner, a thin man named Samuel Porter, watched them with undisguised suspicion as Isaac placed his order for flour, sugar, coffee, and various other supplies. When Isaac mentioned that Arizona would be picking up supplies for him regularly from now on, Samuel hesitated. "I do not give credit to thieves," he said bluntly. "She is not asking for credit. She will be using my account," Isaac replied evenly. "Is that going to be a problem, Samuel?" The two men stared at each other for a long moment before Samuel backed down. "I guess not, but I will be watching my inventory closely." "You do that," Isaac said, then proceeded to add several items clearly meant for Arizona to the order. Fabric for a new dress, a sturdy pair of work boots, a hat to protect her from the sun, and a heavy coat for the coming winter months. "Isaac, you do not have to do this," Arizona protested quietly, aware of how expensive these items were. "Consider it an advance on your wages. You cannot work on a ranch without proper clothing and boots. Those thin shoes you have will not last a week." He turned back to Samuel. "Add all of this to my account." Samuel tallied everything up with obvious reluctance, and Isaac paid a portion in cash, arranging to settle the rest at the end of the month. As they loaded their purchases into the wagon Isaac had brought, Arizona felt overwhelmed by his continued generosity. "I will pay you back," she said earnestly as they climbed onto the wagon bench. "For the clothes and boots, I mean. You can take it out of my wages." "Already planned on it," Isaac said, snapping the reins to get the horses moving. "But do not worry about it right now. Just focus on learning the work and getting your strength back. Everything else will sort itself out in time." They rode in silence for a while, the wagon rattling over the rutted road back toward the ranch. The New Mexico landscape stretched out around them in all directions, vast and unforgiving under the afternoon sun. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks touched with snow even in late summer, and the air smelled of dust and sage and the particular dryness that characterized this high desert country. "Can I ask you something?" Arizona said finally, breaking the silence. "Go ahead." "Why are you not married? You are young, you have a good ranch, you seem like a decent man. Women in town must have noticed." Isaac was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "I was engaged once back in Colorado, girl named Sarah Mitchell. We grew up together, planned to marry as soon as I had enough money saved for our own place. That was part of why I was working so hard on that ranch, taking every extra job I could find. I wanted to give her a good life." "What happened?" Arizona asked gently. Winter was harsh that year. "Worst I had ever seen. Snow came early and stayed late, and people started getting sick. Sarah caught pneumonia in February." His voice was carefully neutral, but Arizona could hear the old pain beneath it. "She died 3 weeks later. The ranch owner died that same month from a different illness. By spring, I had inheritance money from him and no reason to stay in Colorado anymore, so I came here and started over." "I am sorry," Arizona said softly. "That must have been terrible. It was 4 years ago now. The grief has dulled, though it never quite goes away." He glanced at her briefly before returning his attention to the road. "I suppose I have not been looking for another wife because I have been too busy building the ranch, and because part of me still feels like I would be betraying Sarah's memory." "I think she would want you to be happy," Arizona said. "If she loved you, she would want you to have a full life, even if she could not be part of it." Isaac smiled slightly, though it was tinged with sadness. "Maybe so. What about you? You said you turned down that widower the Aid Society wanted you to marry. Has there been anyone else you cared for?" "No," Arizona said honestly. "Before my father got sick, I was just 17 and too focused on taking care of our household to think much about courting. After he died, I was too busy trying to survive. There was a boy once when I was 15 who used to walk me home from church, Johnny Peters. But he moved away with his family to California when the silver mine his father worked closed down. Nothing ever came of it." "So we are both starting fresh then," Isaac observed. "I suppose we are." The rest of the ride passed in comfortable quiet, and when they reached the ranch, they worked together to unload the supplies. Arizona changed into the new work boots Isaac had purchased, and the difference was immediately apparent. Her feet no longer slipped and pinched with every step, and the sturdy leather would protect her from thorns and rough ground. That evening, Isaac taught her how to care for the horses properly, showing her how to brush them down, check their hooves for stones, and watch for any signs of injury or illness. He let her practice on Dusty, the gentle bay, while he worked on Copper. "Horses can sense fear and uncertainty," he explained as Arizona tentatively ran the brush along Dusty's flank. "If you approach them calmly and confidently, they will usually respond in kind. But if you are nervous, they will pick up on that and become nervous themselves." "What if I do not feel confident?" Arizona asked, eyeing Storm, who was watching them intently from her stall. "Fake it until you do. That is how most of us get through life anyway." Arizona laughed, surprised by his dry humor, and Isaac grinned in response. It was the first real smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his face from merely handsome to striking. She felt something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear or hunger, something warm and unfamiliar that made her look away quickly before he could read it in her expression. They ate dinner together again that night, and Arizona found herself relaxing in his presence, asking questions about his life and the ranch, sharing carefully edited stories from her own past. Isaac was easy to talk to once he warmed up, though he remained somewhat reserved, as if he too was protecting old wounds. "My father was not always in debt," Arizona said as they cleaned up after the meal. "When I was young, maybe 10 or 11, he had a good job working for the railroad. We had a nice house in Albuquerque, and my mother was still alive. She died when I was 12. Fever took her quickly, and after that my father started drinking. Not constantly, but enough that he made bad decisions. He gambled, took out loans he could not repay, fell in with men who took advantage of him. By the time I was 15, we had lost the house in Albuquerque and moved here to Las Lunas where living was cheaper. He promised he would stop drinking and gambling, and for a while he did. But old habits die hard. You must have loved him very much to take care of him through all that, Isaac said. He was my father. I did not know what else to do. Arizona dried the last plate and set it on the shelf. But I was also angry at him for wasting our lives, for not being stronger. Is that terrible to admit? No, it is honest. Love and anger can exist together. That does not make either one less real. Isaac hung the dish towel on its hook and turned to face her fully. You did the best you could with what you had, Arizona. That is all anyone can ask. She met his eyes and saw genuine understanding there, devoid of judgment or pity, and something inside her shifted. This cowboy who had caught her stealing and offered grace instead of condemnation was becoming more than just her employer. He was becoming someone she trusted, someone she looked forward to seeing each morning, someone whose approval mattered to her in ways that went beyond simple gratitude. The realization frightened her, because she had learned the hard way that depending on others only led to disappointment and pain. But looking at Isaac's steady gaze, she thought maybe he might be different. Maybe he might be worth the risk. The days began to blur together in the best possible way as Arizona settled into the rhythm of ranch life. Each morning she woke before dawn, fed the animals, collected eggs, and helped Isaac with whatever tasks the day required. Some days they rode out to check on the cattle, making sure none had wandered too far or gotten injured. Other days they worked on maintaining the property, fixing fences, cleaning water troughs, repairing equipment. Isaac was a patient teacher, explaining things thoroughly and never making her feel stupid when she made mistakes. When she accidentally left a gate unlatched and 2 horses wandered into the cattle pasture, he simply helped her round them up and showed her how to secure the latch properly. When she burned dinner one night because she was distracted watching a spectacular sunset, he ate the charred meal without complaint and reminded her to set a timer next time. In return, Arizona threw herself into the work with determination that surprised even herself. Her body adapted to the physical demands, her blisters healing and her muscles growing stronger. She learned to anticipate what needed doing without being told, to read the weather signs that Isaac pointed out, to understand the animal's behaviors and needs. But it was the quiet moments between the work that she treasured most. Sitting on the porch in the evening after dinner, watching the stars emerge in the vast New Mexico sky while Isaac whittled and she mended clothes. Riding out to check the cattle with the morning sun painting the landscape in shades of gold and crimson. Isaac pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the land. Working side by side in the garden, their hands occasionally brushing as they reached for the same weed, both of them pulling back quickly but neither quite fast enough to hide the spark of awareness. 3 weeks after Arizona started working at the ranch, Isaac asked her to accompany him into town again for supplies. This time, when they walked through Las Lunas, the whispers were less pointed and the stares less hostile. Margaret Henderson even nodded grudgingly in Arizona's direction, which Isaac noted with quiet satisfaction. At the Mercantile, Samuel Porter greeted them with neutral professionalism rather than outright suspicion. As Isaac placed his order, Samuel cleared his throat awkwardly. "I may have been hasty in my judgment of you, Miss Zimmerman," he said stiffly. "Isaac speaks highly of your work ethic, and I have heard from others that you have been keeping to the straight and narrow. I wanted to acknowledge that." Arizona was so surprised by the apology that she stood speechless for a moment before managing. "Thank you, Mr. Porter. That means a great deal to me." "Yes, well." Samuel shuffled some papers on his counter uncomfortably. "Everyone deserves a second chance, I suppose." As they loaded their supplies into the wagon later, Arizona felt lighter than she had in years. "People are starting to accept me," she said wonderingly. "People are starting to see what I saw from the beginning," Isaac corrected. "That you are a good person who made hard choices to survive." "You barely knew me when you offered me work. How could you have seen that?" Isaac secured the last bag in the wagon bed before turning to look at her directly. "I saw it in your eyes that first night. You were terrified but trying to hide it, desperate but still proud, caught but not defeated. Those are not the eyes of someone bad. Those are the eyes of someone fighting to live with whatever dignity they can hold on to." Arizona felt heat rise to her cheeks under the intensity of his gaze. "I think you see more in people than is really there. Or maybe you do not see enough in yourself." He held her eyes for another moment before climbing onto the wagon bench. "Come on. We should get back before the afternoon heat gets worse." The ride home was quiet but comfortable, and Arizona found herself stealing glances at Isaac's profile as he drove, memorizing the strong line of his jaw, the way his dark hair curled slightly at his collar, the capable way his hands held the reins. She was developing feelings for him. She could no longer deny that to herself, but she had no idea if he felt anything similar, or if he simply saw her as an employee he was helping. That evening, after they had finished dinner and Isaac had gone out to check on the horses one final time before bed, Arizona sat on the porch steps and allowed herself to really examine these growing feelings. She had never been in love before, had only experienced the shallow crush she had felt for Johnny Peters when she was 15, and this was entirely different. This was deeper, quieter, more substantial. This was caring about someone's well-being as much as your own, wanting to see them smile, feeling proud of their accomplishments, trusting them with parts of yourself you usually kept hidden. But was it love? Could it be love after only 3 weeks? Arizona was still pondering this when Isaac returned from the barn and found her sitting in the darkness, the moon providing the only illumination. "You all right?" he asked, sitting down beside her on the steps, but leaving a respectful distance between them. "Just thinking," Arizona said honestly, "about how much has changed in such a short time. For the better, I hope, definitely for the better." She drew her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. "Isaac, can I ask you something personal? You can ask. I may or may not answer." There was a hint of humor in his voice. "Do you ever think about courting again, finding someone to share your life with?" She felt more than saw him tense slightly beside her. "Sometimes," he admitted after a pause. "It gets lonely out here, and I always thought I would have a family eventually. But I have not met anyone who made me want to risk opening myself up to that kind of loss again." "Haven't you?" Arizona asked quietly, her heart hammering in her chest at her own boldness. Isaac turned to look at her, his dark eyes searching her face in the moonlight. "Are you asking what I think you are asking?" "I do not know," Arizona said honestly. "Maybe. I know it has only been a few weeks, and I know I am just your employee, and I know you probably still think of me as that desperate thief you caught in your barn. But I feel something when I am around you, Isaac, something good and real and frightening, and I needed you to know that, even if you do not feel the same way." The silence that followed was excruciating. Arizona could hear every cricket chirping, every rustle of wind through the sage, every beat of her own racing heart. She had laid herself bare, and now she waited for rejection, for the gentle explanation that he valued her as a worker but nothing more. Instead, Isaac reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. "I think about you constantly," he said quietly. "About how brave you are, how hard you work, how you make me laugh even when I am tired and frustrated. About how the house feels less empty when you are in it. How I look forward to our evenings talking on this porch. How I have to remind myself not to stand too close to you when we are working because all I want is to pull you into my arms and never let go." Arizona's breath caught. "Then why have you kept your distance?" "Because I did not want to take advantage of you. You work for me, you depend on me for food and shelter. If I made advances, and you felt obligated to accept them, that would make me no better than those men who offer women help only to extract something in return." Isaac squeezed her hand gently. "I wanted you to feel safe here, to trust that I had no ulterior motives, before I ever said anything about my feelings." "I do feel safe," Arizona said, shifting closer to him on the steps until their shoulders touched. "Safer than I have felt in years. And these feelings I have are not about gratitude or obligation. They are real, Isaac. They are mine." He lifted his free hand to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing lightly across her skin. "Then I need you to know that if we pursue this, it cannot be just a casual thing. I am not built that way. If I court you, it is with serious intentions. Marriage, family, a life together, all of it or nothing." "All of it," Arizona whispered. "I want all of it." Isaac leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and when his lips finally met hers, it was gentle and sweet and full of promise. Arizona had been kissed exactly once before, a clumsy attempt by Johnny Peters behind the church when she was 15, and this was nothing like that. This was tender and sure, a claiming and a giving all at once, and when they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "I have wanted to do that since the second week you were here," Isaac admitted, his forehead resting against hers. "Why did you wait so long?" Arizona asked, her hand coming up to rest over his heart, feeling it thunder beneath her palm. "I told you. I wanted to be sure you felt safe, and I wanted to be sure my feelings were real and not just loneliness or attraction. But Arizona, I am sure now. I am completely sure." They sat together on the porch steps for another hour, holding hands and talking about everything and nothing, stealing kisses that grew gradually less tentative and more confident. Finally, when the moon had moved halfway across the sky, Isaac walked her to the barn and kissed her goodnight at the door to her room. "Sleep well," he said softly. "Tomorrow everything will be the same as it was today, except I will get to hold your hand while we work and kiss you whenever I want." "I cannot wait," Arizona said truthfully, then slipped inside and closed the door, leaning against it with a grin so wide her cheeks hurt. She had come to this ranch as a thief, desperate and alone, expecting punishment or exploitation. Instead, she had found honest work, respect, safety, and now love. Real love, the kind that promised a future instead of just survival. The next few weeks were the happiest of Arizona's life. She and Isaac settled into their new dynamic with surprising ease, working side by side during the day and spending their evenings talking, laughing, and learning everything they could about each other. Isaac was courting her properly, as he had promised, never pushing for more physical intimacy than she was comfortable with, but making his intentions clear through word and deed. He brought her wildflowers he found while checking the cattle, their roots carefully wrapped so she could plant them in the garden. He taught her to ride properly, putting her on Dusty at first, and then gradually introducing her to the other horses, his patient instruction and steady presence giving her confidence. He asked about her dreams for the future, really listened to her answers, and shared his own hopes for expanding the ranch and maybe eventually having children to pass it on to. They attended church together in Las Lunas one Sunday morning, and if the congregation was surprised to see Isaac Turner courting his ranch hand, most had the grace not to comment openly. Margaret Henderson even approached them after the service to grudgingly admit that Arizona had turned out better than she expected. "I suppose you have Isaac to thank for that," Margaret said, though her tone was less hostile than it had been. "I have myself to thank for it," Arizona corrected gently but firmly. "Isaac gave me an opportunity, but I did the work. I made the choice to change my circumstances." Margaret looked taken aback for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough. You have more spine than I gave you credit for, girl." After she walked away, Isaac pulled Arizona close and pressed a kiss to her temple. "I am proud of you for standing up for yourself." "I learned from the best," Arizona said, leaning into his embrace. As autumn approached and the temperatures began to cool, Isaac approached Arizona one evening after dinner with nervous energy she had rarely seen from him. They were on the porch, as had become their custom, watching the sun set over the mountains, and Isaac kept fidgeting with something in his pocket. "Are you all right?" Arizona asked, concerned by his unusual behavior. "Yes, no, maybe." Isaac took a deep breath and pulled a small object from his pocket, turning it over in his hands. "Arizona, we have been courting for 2 months now, and I have been thinking about this constantly. I know some people would say it is too soon, that we should wait longer to be absolutely certain. But I was certain after 3 weeks, and I am even more certain now." Arizona's heart began to race as she recognized what he held. It was a ring, simple and gold, with a small blue stone set in the center. "This was my mother's ring," Isaac continued, his voice rough with emotion. "She gave it to me before she died, told me to give it to someone worthy when the time came. Arizona Zimmerman, you are worthy of this and so much more. You are strong and brave and kind and everything I never knew I needed in a partner. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife and build a life with me here on this ranch?" Arizona felt tears streaming down her face before she even realized she was crying. "Yes," she managed through her overwhelmed emotions. "Yes, Isaac, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, and Arizona wrapped herself around him, feeling like she had finally found where she belonged. They were married 6 weeks later in the small church in Las Lunas, with half the town in attendance. Arizona wore a new dress she had sewn herself from fabric Isaac had purchased, cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Isaac wore his best suit, his hair neatly trimmed and his face cleanly shaven, and when he saw her walking down the aisle toward him, his eyes filled with tears. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Isaac kissed her like a man who had been dying of thirst and finally found water. The reception afterward was held in the church hall, with food donated by various townspeople and music provided by a local fiddler. Margaret Henderson approached them during the reception, pressing a small wrapped package into Arizona's hands. "A wedding gift," she said gruffly. "You have done well for yourself, girl. I am glad I was wrong about you." Arizona opened the package to find a beautiful embroidered tablecloth. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. This means more than you know." "Yes, well, do not make me regret softening toward you." But Margaret's eyes were kind when she said it. That night, Isaac carried Arizona over the threshold of the ranch house, which was now officially her home. They had moved her belongings from the barn room to the main house the previous week, and Isaac had spent days cleaning and rearranging to make space for her things. "Welcome home, Mrs. Turner," he said, setting her down gently in the main room. "It feels strange to be called that," Arizona admitted, looking around at the familiar space that was now irrevocably different. "Good strange, but strange. You will get used to it." Isaac pulled her close, his hand settling on her waist. "I intend to call you that every day for the rest of our lives." Their wedding night was tender and nervous and perfect. Two people who had both been alone for so long finally finding completeness in each other. Isaac was gentle and patient, making sure Arizona felt safe and cherished, and when they finally fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, Arizona thought she had never felt more content. The months that followed their wedding were busy ones. Isaac began teaching Arizona more advanced aspects of running the ranch, explaining his accounting system, introducing her to his business contacts, making it clear that he considered her a full partner in the operation rather than just a helper. Together, they made plans for expanding their herd in the spring and possibly acquiring more land to the north if the price was right. Winter came to New Mexico territory with sharp cold and occasional snow, though nothing like the brutal winters Isaac described from his time in Colorado. Arizona learned to bank the fire properly to keep the house warm through the night, to bundle up in layers when they had to work outside, to cook hearty stews and soups that would stick to their ribs during the coldest months. She also learned what it meant to truly share a life with someone. The daily intimacy of waking up next to Isaac each morning, of washing his clothes and cooking his meals and knowing his routines and preferences. The comfort of having someone to talk to about her day, someone who cared about her thoughts and opinions, someone who made her laugh even when she was tired and cold. They had their first real argument in January over Isaac's tendency to overwork himself. He had been out in a freezing rain for 6 hours repairing a damaged fence, had come home soaked and shivering, and had tried to brush off Arizona's concern by saying ranch work did not stop for weather. "You are going to make yourself sick," Arizona insisted, forcing him into dry clothes and pushing him toward the fire. "The fence can wait another day if conditions are dangerous. The cattle could get out through that gap," Isaac argued even as his teeth chattered. "I had to fix it." "You had to stay alive and healthy more than you had to fix it this instant," Arizona shot back. "I cannot run this ranch alone if you die of pneumonia because you are too stubborn to wait for better weather." The reminder of how he had lost his first fiancée to pneumonia hit home, and Isaac's expression crumbled. "You are right. I am sorry. I just get so focused on what needs doing that I do not always think about the risks." Arizona knelt beside him, taking his cold hands in hers. "I understand wanting to work hard and take care of things, but you are no good to this ranch or to me if you work yourself to death. We are partners now, Isaac. That means we take care of each other and the ranch in that order." "Partners," Isaac agreed quietly, pulling her into his lap and holding her close. "I am still learning how to factor someone else into my decisions. Be patient with me, always," Arizona promised, kissing him softly. "As long as you promise to be more careful." They weathered that storm and others that followed, learning how to navigate disagreements and compromise, how to support each other through frustrations and setbacks. When one of Isaac's best horses went lame in February, Arizona sat with him in the barn half the night, helping him tend to the animal and offering comfort when it became clear the injury would never fully heal. When Arizona caught a bad cold in March, Isaac took over all her usual chores without complaint and brought her soup and tea every few hours until she recovered. Spring arrived with a burst of wildflowers and new calves, and the ranch came alive with activity. Isaac hired 2 temporary hands to help with the spring work, a young man named Thomas who was saving money to start his own ranch, and an older Mexican man named Diego who had decades of experience with cattle. Both men treated Arizona with respect when they saw how capable she was, and how much Isaac valued her input. One warm evening in April, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Isaac placed his hand on Arizona's stomach and said quietly, "I have been thinking we should probably start preparing one of the extra rooms as a nursery." Arizona covered his hand with hers, her heart swelling with love and anticipation. "I was wondering when you would bring that up. I have been thinking the same thing." "Yeah." Isaac's face lit up with hope and excitement. "You want children? We have never really talked about specifics." "I want your children," Arizona said clearly. "I want to fill this ranch with life and laughter and the sound of little feet running through these rooms. I want to build a family with you, Isaac Turner." He kissed her then, deep and long and full of promise, and that night they made love with new intention, both of them imagining the future they were creating together. By early summer, Arizona's suspicions were confirmed when she missed her monthly courses for the second time and began experiencing waves of nausea in the mornings. The doctor in Las Lunas examined her and confirmed she was approximately 3 months along, due to deliver sometime in late December or early January. Isaac was overjoyed when she told him, picking her up and spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "We are going to be parents," he kept saying wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby." "Babies," Arizona corrected with a grin. "The doctor said he heard 2 heartbeats. We are having twins." Isaac set her down carefully, his eyes wide with shock. "Twins, are you certain?" "That is what the doctor said. He seemed pretty confident." Arizona watched Isaac's face cycle through surprise, joy, and panic in rapid succession. "Twins," he repeated, then started laughing. "Of course. We do nothing small, do we? All right then. Twins, we can handle twins." "We can definitely handle twins," Arizona agreed, though privately she had her own moments of panic about the reality of caring for 2 infants at once. The pregnancy progressed well, despite Arizona's occasional nausea and fatigue. Isaac became almost comically protective, insisting she rest more and avoid heavy lifting, taking on extra chores himself to compensate. Thomas and Diego, who Isaac had kept on full-time due to how well they worked, picked up the slack without complaint, and both men seemed excited about the prospect of babies on the ranch. "My wife and I have 6 children," Diego told Arizona one day as she collected eggs with his help. "They are the greatest blessing and the greatest challenge of my life. You and Isaac will be wonderful parents." "I hope so," Arizona said, one hand resting on her growing stomach where she had recently started feeling flutters of movement. "I barely remember what it was like to have a mother. I worry I will not know how to be one. You will learn, just like every parent does, and you have a good man who will help you every step of the way." Diego smiled warmly. "Besides, children are resilient. They need love and food and safety more than they need perfection." His words comforted Arizona, and as the months passed and her belly grew, she found herself getting more excited than nervous. She and Isaac spent evenings discussing names, preparing the nursery with 2 small cradles Isaac built himself, and imagining what their children might look like. "I hope they have your eyes," Isaac said one night in September, his hand splayed across her rounded stomach as they lay in bed. "That beautiful green color, and maybe your dark hair." "I hope they have your strength," Arizona replied, lacing her fingers through his, "and your kindness. Those are better things to inherit than eye color." "They will have your courage," Isaac said with certainty, "and your determination. They will be incredible no matter what they look like." As Arizona's due date approached, Isaac became increasingly anxious about something going wrong. The memory of losing Sarah haunted him, and though he tried to hide his fears, Arizona could see them in his eyes whenever she caught him watching her with an expression of mingled joy and terror. "I am going to be fine," she told him gently one evening in late December when the babies had dropped lower in her belly and every movement had become an effort. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. The doctor said I am healthy and strong and everything is progressing normally." Sarah was healthy too, Isaac said quietly, until she was not. Arizona took his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "I am not Sarah, and our babies are not pneumonia. You cannot protect me from every possible danger in the world, Isaac. All you can do is be here with me and trust that we will get through this together." "I know. I am trying." He pressed his forehead against hers. "I just cannot lose you. I would not survive it." "You will not lose me," Arizona promised, though she knew it was a promise she might not be able to keep. Childbirth was dangerous, especially with twins, and they both knew it. But fear would not help either of them, so she chose faith instead. "We are going to have these babies, and we are going to raise them together, and we are going to grow old watching them build their own lives. That is the future I see, Isaac. Hold on to that." Labor began on a frigid January morning, 3 days after the new year of 1883 had begun. Arizona woke to contractions that took her breath away, and Isaac immediately sent Thomas riding hard for the doctor while he helped Arizona through the early stages. Diego's wife, Maria, who had experience as a midwife, arrived within an hour and took charge with calm efficiency. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the day and into the night. Isaac stayed by Arizona's side the entire time, letting her squeeze his hands until his fingers went numb, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement and love when she felt like giving up. "I cannot do this," Arizona gasped during a particularly brutal contraction late in the evening. "It hurts too much." "Yes, you can," Isaac said firmly. "You are the strongest person I know. You survived losing everything, being alone, stealing to live, starting over from nothing. You can survive this too. You are almost there." The first baby, a boy, arrived just after midnight with a lusty cry that filled the room. Maria cleaned him quickly and placed him in Isaac's arms while she turned her attention back to Arizona and the second baby. Isaac stared down at his son with tears streaming down his face, overcome with love and awe. "He is perfect," he breathed. "Arizona, he is perfect." But Arizona was already being swept into another contraction as the second baby made its entrance. This one took longer, and Arizona was so exhausted she could barely push. But Maria coached her expertly, and Isaac held their son close while using his free hand to grip Arizona's, lending her his strength. The second baby, another boy, arrived 20 minutes later, smaller than his brother but equally healthy. Maria wrapped him warmly and handed him to Isaac, so he held both sons while the doctor tended to Arizona, making sure she was not hemorrhaging and that everything was progressing as it should. Finally, when everyone was satisfied that Arizona was stable, Isaac carefully placed one baby in her arms while keeping the other cradled against his chest. Arizona looked down at her son, taking in his tiny features and the dark hair that already covered his small head, and felt a love so overwhelming it was almost frightening in its intensity. "We made them," she whispered in wonder. "We made 2 perfect little boys." "We did," Isaac agreed, his voice rough with emotion. "What should we name them?" They had discussed names endlessly but had never made final decisions, wanting to meet their children before committing. Now, looking at the 2 tiny faces, Arizona knew exactly what felt right. "The one I am holding looks like a James," she said. "James Robert after my father. He deserves to have his name carried forward despite his flaws. James Robert Turner, Isaac repeated, testing it out. I like that, and this one looks like a William to me. William Andrew Turner, after the ranch owner in Colorado who saved my life. James and William, Arizona said softly. Our sons. The weeks following the twins' birth were exhausting but joyful. Arizona recovered slowly from the difficult labor, and Isaac took on most of the household duties, while Thomas and Diego managed the ranch work. The babies were demanding in the way newborns always are, crying frequently and needing to be fed every few hours, but both parents rose to the challenge with determination and love. I've never been this tired in my entire life, Arizona said one morning after a particularly rough night where both boys had cried in shifts, giving neither parent any real rest. Me either, Isaac agreed, bouncing William gently while Arizona nursed James. But I have also never been this happy. Is it possible to be both at once? Apparently so. Arizona smiled despite her exhaustion, looking around at their chaotic household with contentment. Diapers were drying near the fire, bottles needed washing, laundry was piled in a basket waiting to be folded, and she could not remember the last time she had brushed her hair properly. And yet, she would not trade this beautiful mess for anything. As the boys grew from helpless infants into curious babies, the ranch seemed to grow with them. Isaac's careful management and smart business decisions paid off, and by the time James and William were a year old, the Turner Ranch was one of the most successful operations in the region. They had expanded their cattle herd to nearly 400 head, acquired an additional 200 acres of grazing land, and built a new barn to accommodate more horses. But more important than financial success was the life they had built together. The ranch house that had once been sparse and lonely was now filled with laughter and toys, and the sound of little boys babbling as they learned to crawl and eventually walk. Thomas had married a girl from town and built a small house on the far corner of the property, staying on as Isaac's foreman. Diego and his family lived in a larger house Isaac had built for them on the north side, and both families had become like extended relatives, sharing meals and celebrations and helping with the children. On James and William's second birthday, they held a party that brought together everyone who had become important in their lives. Margaret Henderson arrived with a cake she had baked herself. Samuel Porter brought wooden toys he had carved, and even the sheriff stopped by with well wishes. The church ladies who had once judged Arizona for her desperate choices now praised her as a model wife and mother, though Arizona found their change of heart somewhat amusing. It is funny how a respectable marriage can erase a multitude of sins, she said to Isaac that evening after all the guests had left, and they were cleaning up together while the exhausted twins napped. You never committed any sins worth erasing, Isaac said firmly. You survived. There is nothing shameful about that, I know, but it took finding you for anyone else to believe it. Arizona wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her head against his chest. Do you ever think about that night in the barn when you caught me stealing? Sometimes. Usually when I am counting my blessings. Isaac kissed the top of her head. Best thing I ever did was offer you work instead of turning you in. Best thing I ever did was accept, Arizona agreed. As the years passed, the Turner Ranch continued to prosper. James and William grew into energetic, intelligent boys who loved helping their father with the animals and following their mother around as she tended the garden. When they were 5, Arizona discovered she was pregnant again, and this time she delivered a healthy baby girl they named Sarah, after Isaac's first love. It felt right to honor her memory that way, acknowledging that she had been part of Isaac's journey to becoming the man Arizona loved. 2 years after Sarah's birth, another daughter arrived, this one named Emma after Arizona's mother. The ranch house, which Isaac had expanded twice by then, rang with the sounds of children playing, arguing, laughing, and learning. Thomas and his wife had 3 children of their own, and Diego's grandchildren visited frequently, so there was always a houseful of young ones running around. On Arizona's 32nd birthday, she stood on the porch of the ranch house watching the sun set over the mountains while Isaac came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. Their children were playing in the yard under Thomas's watchful supervision, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "Happy?" Isaac asked, though he already knew the answer. "More than I ever thought possible," Arizona said honestly, leaning back against his solid warmth. "Do you remember when I thought my life was over? When I was stealing food just to survive one more day and could not imagine any kind of future? I remember. You were so scared but trying so hard not to show it. If someone had told me then that 12 years later I would be standing here with a husband I adored, 4 healthy children, and a successful ranch, I would have thought they were cruel for mocking me with impossible dreams." Arizona turned in his arms to face him. "But you made those impossible dreams into reality, Isaac. You saved my life that night in the barn." "We saved each other," Isaac corrected gently. "I was lonely and drifting before you came along. You gave me purpose beyond just building a ranch. You gave me a family and a reason to build a future instead of just surviving day to day. We saved each other, Arizona." She kissed him then, deep and sweet, still feeling that flutter of excitement she had felt the first time their lips met all those years ago. Some things never changed, no matter how much time passed or how many responsibilities they accumulated. The love between them remained constant, a foundation everything else in their lives was built upon. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Arizona and Isaac sat together on their porch as they had done countless times before. They talked about plans for the ranch, about their children's futures, about growing old together on this land they had built their life around. "James wants to take over the ranch someday," Isaac said, a note of pride in his voice. "He told me yesterday that he wants to learn everything so he can run it when I am too old to manage anymore." "He is only 7, Arizona pointed out with amusement. "But yes, he has always been the serious one. William will probably want to do something else, go have adventures. He has your restless spirit. And the girls? Sarah wants to be a teacher, and Emma changes her mind every week about what she wants to be when she grows up. Last week it was a doctor, this week it is a horse trainer." Arizona smiled fondly. "They will all find their own paths. We will make sure they have the choices and opportunities we never had." "That is the whole point," Isaac agreed, "making sure the next generation has it better than we did." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, holding hands and watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast New Mexico sky. Arizona thought about the scared, desperate young woman she had been, stealing from barns to survive, unable to imagine any future beyond the next day's hunger. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone from another lifetime entirely. But she also understood that every hardship she had endured, every desperate choice she had made, had led her to this moment. To this man, this family, this life she had built from absolutely nothing. The scars of her past had not disappeared, but they had become part of her story, proof of her strength and resilience rather than marks of shame. "Thank you," she said suddenly, squeezing Isaac's hand. "For what?" "For seeing me when I was invisible. For offering grace when you could have offered judgment. For believing I was worth saving when I had stopped believing it myself." Isaac brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "You were always worth saving, Arizona. I just made sure you knew it too." As the years continued to unfold, the Turner Ranch became a cornerstone of the Las Lunas community. Isaac served on the town council and helped establish a new school that all the local children could attend, including his own. Arizona organized a women's cooperative that helped other struggling women learn skills and find work, ensuring that no one else had to resort to stealing to survive. She never forgot where she had come from or how easily circumstances could break someone down. Their children grew into capable, compassionate adults who made their parents proud. James did indeed take over management of the ranch when he turned 23, demonstrating the same work ethic and integrity his father had modeled. William went east to study law and returned to practice in New Mexico, using his education to help homesteaders and small ranchers protect their land rights. Sarah became a teacher as she had dreamed, educating children throughout the territory. Emma surprised everyone by becoming a skilled veterinarian, one of the few women in that profession, and worked alongside her brother James to keep the ranch's animals healthy. When Arizona turned 45, she and Isaac celebrated their 23rd wedding anniversary by taking their first real vacation together. They left the ranch in James's capable hands and traveled to California, spending 2 weeks exploring San Francisco and the coast. It was strange to be away from the ranch after so many years, but also freeing to have time alone together without the constant demands of work and family. "We should do this more often," Arizona said as they walked along the beach, hand in hand, watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and crimson. "Just the two of us, remembering what it is like to be husband and wife instead of just ranch owners and parents." "Agreed," Isaac said, pulling her close despite the public setting. At their age and with their solid reputation, no one was likely to judge them for a simple embrace. "Though I will admit, I miss the kids and the ranch already." "So do I," Arizona laughed. "But missing them makes coming home all the sweeter." They returned to Las Lunas refreshed and renewed, diving back into ranch life with appreciation for both the escape and the homecoming. The years that followed brought the usual mix of joys and sorrows. Diego passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, and the whole community mourned the loss of a good man. Thomas's wife had their 7th child, a late surprise baby that kept everyone entertained. James married a rancher's daughter named Catherine, and they gave Arizona and Isaac their first grandchildren, twin girls in a twist of fate that made everyone laugh. "Twins run in families," the doctor said when announcing the double pregnancy to James and Catherine. "Your father must have been one." "He was," Isaac confirmed, thinking of the brother he had lost to fever when they were both children. He had rarely spoken of his twin, the grief too old and buried, but seeing his son become a father to twins brought the memories flooding back in bittersweet waves. Arizona held Isaac's hand during the delivery, both of them supporting James as Catherine labored. When the 2 baby girls arrived healthy and screaming, Arizona thought about how far they had all come. From a desperate thief and a lonely cowboy to this sprawling family full of love and life. "What are you going to name them?" Isaac asked his son, who looked overwhelmed and thrilled in equal measure. "Grace and Hope," James said without hesitation, looking at Catherine, who nodded her agreement. "Because that is what grandmother and grandfather gave us all." Arizona's eyes filled with tears at the tribute, and Isaac had to clear his throat several times before he could speak. "Those are perfect names," he managed finally. William married a few years later, bringing home a smart, fierce woman named Margaret who had been one of the first female law clerks in San Francisco. Sarah married a fellow teacher, and they moved to Santa Fe where they both taught at a school for Native American children. Emma remained unmarried well into her 30s, too focused on her veterinary practice to worry about finding a husband, though she eventually fell in love with a rancher who valued her independence and expertise. As Arizona and Isaac entered their 50s and then 60s, they gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, trusting James and his family to carry things forward. They remained active and involved, but their role shifted from laborers to advisors, from primary decision-makers to respected elders, whose counsel was sought but not imposed. They spent their days working in the garden Arizona had expanded over the years, taking long rides across the property on horses now too old for hard work but perfect for gentle exploration, playing with grandchildren who thought they hung the moon, and sitting on that same porch where they had first confessed their feelings for each other so many years ago. "Do you ever regret it?" Arizona asked one evening when they were both 68, still healthy and active but feeling the weight of their years. "Taking in a thief instead of turning her over to the law? Not for a single moment," Isaac said without hesitation. "Best decision I ever made." "You know that, I know, but I like hearing you say it." Arizona smiled and rested her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Isaac Turner. Have I told you that today?" "Only 3 times," he teased gently, "but I never get tired of hearing it." "I love you," she said again, making it 4. "I will love you every day for the rest of my life and whatever comes after." "And I will love you just as long," Isaac promised, kissing her forehead tenderly. "My thief, my wife, my heart." They sat together as the sun set, and the stars emerged, surrounded by the life they had built, the family they had created, and the love that had sustained them through every challenge and celebrated every joy. The ranch house behind them glowed with lamplight and rang with the voices of children and grandchildren gathering for dinner. The land stretched out before them, beautiful and harsh and home. Arizona thought about that terrified young woman who had crouched in a barn so long ago, certain her life was over, unable to imagine any kind of future worth living. She wished she could reach back through time and tell that girl what was coming. Tell her about the cowboy who would offer grace instead of judgment, about the love they would build together, about the family and home and life that waited just beyond her worst moment. But maybe it was better that young Arizona had not known. Maybe the journey was sweeter for having been unexpected, the joy more profound for having emerged from despair. Isaac squeezed her hand, pulling her from her reverie, and Arizona squeezed back, holding on to this moment and this man and this beautiful life they had created together from absolutely nothing but hope and hard work, and love that refused to quit. Their story had started with theft and capture, and an offer that changed everything. It continued through decades of building and growing and learning to love more deeply than either had thought possible. And it would end someday, as all stories must, but not yet. Not while they still had porch steps to sit on and sunsets to watch and grandchildren to spoil and each other's hands to hold. For now, they had this perfect evening and this perfect life, and that was more than enough. That was everything. When Arizona was 72, she fell ill with a fever that turned into pneumonia. Isaac never left her side, sitting vigil through long nights while their children and grandchildren gathered, fearing the worst. But Arizona was tougher than pneumonia, tougher than most things, and she fought her way back to health with the same determination she had shown fighting for survival so many years earlier. "You cannot get rid of me that easily," she told Isaac when she was finally out of danger, her voice weak but her spirit strong. "I should have known better than to worry," Isaac said, but his red-rimmed eyes betrayed how terrified he had been. "You have always been the strongest person I know." They made it to their 50th wedding anniversary, a golden celebration that brought together 5 generations of the family they had built. James and Catherine's twin daughters, Grace and Hope, now had children of their own. William and Margaret's 4 sons all attended with their families. Sarah and her husband brought their adopted children and foster children, having spent their lives giving homes to those who needed them. Emma and her husband ran the most successful veterinary practice in the territory, treating animals from dozens of ranches. The party was held at the ranch house, which had been expanded and renovated many times over the years, but retained its essential character. Children ran through the rooms where Arizona had once cooked her first meal for Isaac, played in the yard where she had first worked until her hands blistered, slept in bedrooms built with love and sacrifice. 50 years, Arizona said wonderingly as she and Isaac cut the cake together, their aged hands still fitting together perfectly. Half a century with you. Best 50 years of my life, Isaac declared loudly enough for everyone to hear. This woman right here is the reason for everything good in my world. She was a thief when I caught her, but she stole my heart that night and never gave it back. The crowd laughed and applauded, and Arizona shook her head at his dramatics even as tears streamed down her weathered face. You are ridiculous. You love it, Isaac countered. I do, she admitted, rising on her toes to kiss him while their assembled family cheered. They lived 4 more good years after that golden anniversary. Years filled with great-grandchildren and quiet mornings and easy companionship that came from decades of truly knowing another person. Years of watching sunsets from their porch and taking slow walks around the property and being exactly where they wanted to be with exactly who they wanted to be with. Isaac passed first, dying peacefully in his sleep at the age of 76. Arizona woke to find him cold beside her and knew immediately that he was gone. She did not scream or cry out, just lay there for a long time with her hand on his chest, saying goodbye to the man who had saved her life by offering grace and built her life by offering love. The funeral was the largest Las Lunas had ever seen, with people traveling from across the territory to pay their respects to a man who had been respected, loved, and admired by everyone who knew him. Arizona stood strong through the service, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, accepting condolences with dignity and grace. But at night, alone in the bed they had shared for 54 years, she wept for the loss of her partner, her best friend, her heart. She lived 2 more years without him, staying at the ranch even though James urged her to move into the main house where he and Catherine could care for her better. She wanted to stay in the home she had built with Isaac, surrounded by memories of their life together. Her health declined gradually, her heart simply wearing out from the long journey of living. On a warm evening in early autumn, surrounded by her children and with Grace and Hope sitting on either side of her bed, Arizona closed her eyes and slipped away peacefully. She was buried beside Isaac on a hill overlooking the ranch, their matching headstones simple but elegant. The dates told a story of long lives well lived, but they could not capture the love that had defined both of them, the grace that had saved one and the courage that had transformed the other. But that was all right, because their real legacy was not in stone or words. It was in the thriving ranch that had started with one desperate woman and one compassionate man. It was in the 5 generations of family who gathered there for holidays and celebrations, who learned to work hard and love deeply, and offer grace to those who needed it. It was in the women's cooperative Arizona had founded that still helped struggling women find their footing. It was in the school Isaac had helped establish and the legal practice William had built to protect the vulnerable. Their story lived on in every act of kindness performed in their names, in every second chance offered to someone desperate, in every moment when grace triumphed over judgment. The Turner Ranch still stood nearly a century later, run by James and Catherine's great-great-grandchildren, who knew the story of Arizona the thief and Isaac the cowboy by heart. New generations of children still played in the yard, still learned about hard work and compassion, and the power of seeing worth in others, even when they could not see it in themselves. And on quiet evenings when the sun set over the New Mexico mountains in shades of gold and crimson, if you listened carefully, you might almost hear the echo of two voices on that old porch, one offering food and work instead of jail, the other accepting with desperate hope. Both of them making the choices that would transform two lonely lives into one extraordinary love story. It had started with a theft in a moonlit barn and a cowboy's unexpected compassion. It had grown into a love that spanned more than half a century and touched countless lives. And it had proven what both Arizona and Isaac had learned that first night and never forgotten. Sometimes the best things in life come from the moments when we choose grace over judgment, when we offer help instead of punishment, when we see potential instead of just mistakes. Sometimes what looks like an ending is actually a beginning. And sometimes the bravest thing we can do is accept help when we need it and offer it when we can. Arizona Zimmerman Turner and Isaac Andrew Turner had lived those truths every day of their long lives together. They had built something beautiful from desperate beginnings, had created love and family and legacy where there had been only loneliness and survival. And that was a story worth remembering, worth retelling, worth learning from. A story that whispered across the generations that no matter how dark things seemed, no matter how desperate circumstances became, grace and love and second chances could transform everything. It had transformed a thief into a beloved matriarch, a lonely cowboy into a respected patriarch, two wounded souls into partners who built a dynasty. That was the power of choosing compassion, of seeing the person beneath the circumstances, of offering food and work instead of jail. That was the power of love.